It seems to keep freezing from time to time. I can see it.
Okay, webinar has now started. So Kerry, we'll just put it with your freezing frame for a while. Let's hope that calms down. Let's welcome our listeners and viewers this morning. This is the community of Elliminyt. Am I pronouncing that right, Kerry?
Elliminyt.
Elliminyt, fantastic. That sounds something. That sounds like kryptonite, doesn't it, from the old Superman movies? So, say that again. Elliminyt.
Elliminyt. Each vowel.
Elliminyt. Elliminyt. Welcome to the community of Elliminyt and the surrounds. Welcome to Fire Safety Essentials. And by its very nature, this is a presentation regarding the essentials when it comes to fire safety. Myself, Raj Samurai, and my co-host, Kerry Deakin, will be taking you on this, this presentation to learn more about fire safety essentials. There is no need to take notes. All the information that we'll be alluding to will be available by way of the download tabs that we're going to provide at the end of the presentation. The duration of this presentation is about 90 minutes or so, between 1 hour and 90 minutes or there. So sit back and enjoy. I'm going to do what is traditional at this time, which is do our acknowledgement of country. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are hosting this online meeting today. And of course, pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging, and any other Aboriginal people here today. So thank you. I'd like to now hand over the controls to my co-host, Kerry, who's going to explain a bit more about some of the technology that we're going to be using today. And the idea is for you not to be fazed by what we're doing. This is the new way that the CFA are using to interact and engage with audiences. By all accounts, it's worked well. It just takes a bit of understanding at the beginning. And this is our practice session. So Kerry's going to give you that sort of small introduction into the technology. Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, Raj. Hello, everyone. We have a webinar today, which means you can't turn on your video or audio. You will be able to interact by answering polls if you're attending live when we put them up on the screen, and the chat function can be used for asking questions. Just to let you know too that we're recording this webinar, and as a reminder, Raj and I can't actually see faces or names of people who are attending. The recording will only be of the presentation of Raj and myself talking, and the slides, of course. You'll be shown animations, a short video, and some photos throughout the session. Don't worry, this won't be a death by PowerPoint presentation. We want you to interact throughout the presentation. Of course, if you're not watching it live, that's not really possible. With the chat function, if you hover your mouse at the bottom of the screen, just move that little cursor, the polls and the chat functions come up. So it launches a little speech box, and you can actually ask questions or put in comments for Raj and myself. We'll actually be asking a couple of questions, so you have the responses, the possibility to respond there. It might look a bit different if you're viewing this by phone or some other device, but the chat function should still be available to you. If you need help at all during the presentation to use the chat function, you can put up a hand. So there's a little, there should be a hand.
The raise hand icon. Yep.
Yeah, and then we can open up that opportunity.
Wonderful.
So thanks, Raj.
Thanks, Kerry. But why don't we just put that to the test straight away? Let's sort of dispel some of those sort of nerves that people may have. Let's open the chat function up and ask our audience where are they joining us from. So those of you in Elliminyt, let us know, where are you? And the way to do that, as Kerry said, is just hover your mouse over the chat function and enter your response. We'll be able to see that and monitor that chat. That's wonderful. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. And this just reinforces some of the information that Kerry has already said. The polls are anonymous. There's no need to be shy in the responses that you give. This is learning for us all, and it's the best way to learn. is of course optional, so there's no compulsion, but hey, we're all in this together, so why not have a go? Don't forget to close out the polls when you finish. That's really important as well. What's the chat function looking like there, Kerry?
Not a lot of responses so far.
Okay.
Maybe people are a little bit shy, Raj.
All right, we'll dispel that shyness. Let's move straight into it. Let's not ponder too much. What are the learning outcomes? What's this morning all about? First of all, we thank you for joining us and taking time out of your busy day. Today is about empowering you. We want you to become more aware of fire safety, the essentials when it comes to knowing and understanding your local risks. And this presentation is localized for the area of Elliminyt. Also, the expectations of fire. What is it about fire that makes it such a horrible force of nature? How do we know if there's a fire in our locality? What's our go-to? What's the way that we communicate and find out about fire? And of course, as is the case with any emergency action, planning and decision making. These are pivotal to a good, safe outcome. Of course, best laid plans can fail. And in this instance, what is it that we're doing? What can we do if that plan fails? And we'll be exploring some of those options. Understanding local fire risks. Now, this is a very crucial element of this presentation. Let's put some context around the area first. This presentation, as I've said, is localized. It's localized towards the people in the Elliminyt and area and surrounds. This locality is in an area of the municipality of Colac Otway, and the brigade area is called Barongarook West. The population is about 2,900 people as of the 2016 census, occupying 1,120 dwellings. So some of these numbers will become more significant as we proceed through the presentation. This area is mainly a residential area, particularly immediately south of Colac in Western Victoria. It was named after the Elliminyt Pastoral Run, also known as Barongarook Run, taken up by Hugh Murray, a gentleman by the name of Hugh Murray, in 1837. Murray is regarded as Colac's founding pastoral settler. So that gives you some context to the lay of the land, very agricultural and residential combined. One thing that Kerry and I have both noted from our travels across our wonderful state, doing much more face-to-face interaction, is the tremendous amount of community cohesion, that community connection that exists within our communities. And it's this very essence of community cohesion that keeps our community strong and looking after each other, looking out for each other, almost that sort of element of mateship, understanding each other's needs and being there for them. And this is the very element of the CFA, the Country Fire Authority. We pin and are very appreciative of that cohesion, because that's the strength of the CFA, that community connection, the idea that we're all in it together, looking after each other. Let's move on. Let's move on by looking at the landscape that surrounds us. No doubt, this particular slide shows a variety of landscapes that exist across our beautiful continent. Victoria is one of the most bush-prone parts of the world. We often talk about the US and California. We are no different. We have a high vulnerability to fire. Why so? This is because of the landscape, a landscape that's actually been shaped by fire over many thousands of years. Fire, in actual fact, has been part of the Australian continent, perhaps for millions of years. Many fires back in the day were started by lightning, and in more recent times, and we're going to talk about the Southwest fires from about this time last year. Aboriginal people used fire. They used fire to care for country. when we talk about caring for country, the fires were a tool that encouraged the growth and extent of grassland for hunting. Fire also discouraged the rapid growth and excessive growth of fuel. I'll be spending some time talking about fuel load very shortly. A reduction in this fuel allowed easy passage across the land. For your information, bushfire record keeping only really started in earnest around 1851, shortly after early European settlement. So that kind of gives you some context of the relationship that the continent has with fire. Let's take that to the next level and sort of bring it up to speed. What are you looking at here? This is a map of the different weather districts that exist across the Southwest. The main take-home message from this is that each fire district will have its own level of fire risk. East Gippsland will be very different to the Mallee, which again will be very different to North Central. Where we are in the Southwest, there'll be a further difference in that weather pattern and the risk of fire. Let's continue to peel back the layers. Let's explore the weather pattern itself. What is it that we're currently going through? You'll see two maps on your screen at the moment. They show both temperature and median rainfall, or average rainfall and average temperature, across a time period September through to November of 2020. Each map is special in its own way, and it actually describes what we call the La Nina effect. What does La Nina mean? Essentially, it means, and this is great news for our farmers, and it's great news for our emergency services when it comes to firefighting. The CFA are appreciative of La Nina for the very simple fact that La Nina conditions are expected to reduce the risk of prolonged fire activity across our state compared to last year. A reduction in prolonged fire activity. Why so? Well, La Nina itself is typified by what we call increased rainfall in the first instance across much of Australia. And this is exemplified by the map on the right-hand side. But also cooler daytime temperatures, generally south of the tropics, and warmer overnight temperatures in the north of the tropics. That's exemplified by the map on the left-hand side. What does this all mean? Well, your locality is in a part of Victoria that has experienced above average soil moisture. So the rainfall has been high, leading to increased moisture in the ground. And again, great news for those in the agricultural game. However, this also means prolific growth of fuel. The fuel load is significantly increased with this increased rainfall. And then if you couple that with the excessive daytime temperatures that we have seen in recent times, temperature days of 30 degrees plus, we have a rapid drying or curing of that fuel. We have fuel in abundance that dries very rapidly. And there is therefore the potential for ignition of this high fuel load. In the event of ignition, we'll have the onset of what we call rapidly moving grass fires. And that's the prediction as we move forward through the fire season, the risk of rapid moving grass fires. For your information, the last La Nina appeared during the winter of 2017-2018, and this was closely followed by its cousin or its counterpart, El Nina, which happened in 2018-19. And there is a relationship between these two weather trends across our continent. What this means for your locality is that there is a potential for fast-moving grass fires. That's the take-home message. Unlike every season, there is a need to be prepared for a fire that could happen as a consequence of this high fuel load. Okay, let's move on. And again, the chat function is available there to you. If there's anything that you're not sure of, any point or comments that you want to raise, both Kerry and I will be monitoring the chat to see those comments and respond accordingly. We're moving on to local vegetation. What is it that is immediately outside your window when you look out? When you're drove into work this morning or on your way home for breakfast? What is it that you're actually seeing? How would you describe the landscape? What's the vegetation? Let's open up the chat function for you to give us some indication of how you see and describe your immediate environment. What does the landscape actually look like? Is it grassland? Is it bush? Is it woodland? Is it scrubby? Is it drying out, or is it still green? Well, what is the lay of the land there? What's the topography like? Is it hilly? Is it flat? You know, are there busy roads? Are there narrow roads? Let's talk about some of those elements of the local vegetation. Yep, we've had a couple of responses coming in. What is your immediate environment? And okay, yeah, mainly bush and grassland is some of the comments coming in. Well, 100%, you know, being familiar with the area, we can definitely say that the predominant fuel in your locality is actually grass with areas of bush and bush along the roadside. So this is an area at risk from fast-moving grass fires. That's a given, we understand that. With the likely risk of ember attack from nearby bush to the north, northeast, and northwest as well. Sorry, northwest and west, no easterly, sorry. So can you see, I've introduced the word ember there, and we'll be exploring embers very shortly. Suffice to say at the moment, this locality would be vulnerable to ember attack. What does this all mean? Well, let's just take it back down a bit. Let's just talk about fire and how fire progresses. Fire is driven by wind. The wind is the driving force. A high force of wind and a higher speed of fire. We often talk about a fire front, and that is the very front or the leading edge of a fire. That fire front is driven by a wind from behind. The relationship between fire and hills, or topography as we often call it, the hills, the lay of the land, the rises and the falls, the nooks and crannies. Fire will travel much faster uphill than it would downhill. In fact, for every 10-degree rise in inclination of a hill, the fire will double in speed. So we mustn't become complacent thinking that there's a number of hills that separate us from an advancing fire front. The fire, in actual fact, may reach you faster than you think because of that relationship. The faster acceleration uphill than downhill. Let's talk a bit more now about local risks. And I think what we'll do at this stage, Kerry, is launch our poll, asking our audience around how they describe some of those local risks. So you'll see a poll come up on your screen very shortly that asks you to identify, and this is a multiple choice question, what is it that you consider to be the local risks in your area? Could it be those narrow roads? Did you manage to get that up, Kerry?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. I can't see it at my end, so I'll just launch it here. Oh, I can see it now. It's just come up. So, yep. So Kerry's just launched the poll. And the first question, and there's only one question, multiple choice. Feel free to answer those that you feel are key players when it comes to high risk in your area. Might just give you a couple of seconds to answer that. Well, one thing we did forget to do at the beginning, Kerry, was to introduce the audience poll as well, assessing the audience. So we might do that after we've done this, so we get a better idea, just for completeness, I think, more than anything else. Okay, let's end that poll, Kerry, and share the results. Fantastic. Okay, so as you can see from the results, 100% in all regards there. Windy roads are an important consideration that could make an area a risk, particularly if vehicles become stranded or blocked on those roads, okay? Often blind spots and reduced visibility during the time of fire could be a potential hazard, further making narrow roads a problem. Those trees that hang over that can be subject to ember attack and limbs falling across those narrow roads or even wider roads will actually prevent access both for entry and exit. And we're talking both emergency vehicles as well as local traffic. Tourism. Tourism is a big concern in many of our localities, and no less in your locality. High tourist areas in summer. Often tourists tend to be naive or very fire naive and may not appreciate the risk as much as you do, and therefore they become a liability. We've already spoken about the speed of grass fires, in excess of 20 kilometers per hour, particularly as they accelerate uphill. The main factors that cause this are what we call convective heat and radiant heat. We're going to talk about embers and those numerous grass fires that can be sparked by embers and what that really means in the grand scheme of things. The high fuel load that we've already alluded to as a consequence of the La Nina effect, rapid growth, rapid drying, more rapid growth, more rapid drying, and the fuel load increases. So for all of you that answered those questions 100%, they are all important considerations and can be qualified as factors that make a local area of high risk. So I'm going to stop sharing those results and close my box out. Thank you for that, Kerry. Let's move on. What does this really mean for your brigade? Elliminyt has at its disposal a very hard-working brigade of very conscientious team members that work 24/7 to maintain the safety of their township, of their locality. At their disposal, they have one tanker and one quick fill. At this point, we pose that very rhetorical question about, well, how realistic would it be and how confident would you be to expect the brigade with its resources at your drive, at your home, on your farm, at your business on a bad fire day? Bearing in mind that this brigade has to service a population of almost 3,000 people and over 1,100 properties. To me, it's really simple maths, isn't it, really? We can't expect the brigade, with all its hard work and competence, to have the ability to be at your home, especially when that brigade is pulled in many other directions on the day of a bad fire day, assisting other brigades, going to other fires in the locality. We need to take ownership of fire. We need to become fire savvy such that we have a fire plan that can be enacted early. We need to have an understanding of the triggers that we're going to use to leave our property advanced of the fire before the flames even arrive. I'm going to stop sharing that at this moment in time and just take 5 seconds to say, well, we've had a tremendous amount of fire activity over the last couple of years, and last year was no different. Victoria has had a lot of fires. Last summer saw huge fires in multiple parts of the state. Both Kerry and I were involved in some of the incident control centres that were set up. The Budgevin fires, for example, from last year, the Southwest fires. Fire is a very clear and present danger, and we cannot underestimate the intensity and the ferociousness and the indiscriminate nature that is fire. A force of Mother Nature that is unpredictable. I'd like to get underneath the skin of fire, literally, and what I'm going to do is share with you an animation that is graphic in detail, and some of you might find quite disturbing and emotionally disturbing. If this is the case, please feel free to look away. This animation will last about 2 minutes or so. Feel free to listen to the dialogue, and then we can have a debrief afterwards. Kerry, would you like to say anything about ember attack before I launch this animation?
Okay, the animation, it gives a very good display of what happens with embers ahead of fires. They can move fast, and there is one place that our little characters in this animation could seek shelter from. In this particular instance, they don't yet, but that is followed up in the next animation that we have. So.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kerry. Ember attack, everyone. Thank you.
During a bushfire, embers will reach your home long before the flames do. Ember attacks are the most common way that houses catch fire. Embers are burning leaves, twigs, and pieces of bark. They help the bushfire spread by starting spot fires ahead of the main fire front. Short-distance ember attacks happen when leaves and small pieces of bark are blown from burning trees. The intense shower of sparks that forms fills the air with hot, burning embers, which will land on nearby vegetation and properties. The hot embers can easily land and get into your clothes and burn your skin, eyes, and airways. Small fires will start all around you and quickly become uncontrollable. The resulting chaos creates confusion as the fire seems to come from many directions, meaning it will be difficult to make good decisions about your safety. The experience will be physically exhausting and emotionally traumatic. Long-distance ember attack is caused by large bushfires that generate intense heat. As the hot air rises, it forms a column of smoke that sucks in air like a vacuum, increasing the intensity of the fire. The updraft in the column lifts embers, like large pieces of burning ribbon bark, hundreds of meters into the air, where strong winds can carry them many kilometers beyond the fire front. On Black Saturday, embers travelled more than 30 kilometres ahead of the main fire. When these embers land, they often start fires where leaves naturally accumulate, like in gutters, doorways and garden beds. So while you might think you're safe when a bushfire is far away, embers can fall from the sky and land around your home long before you even know there's a fire. But remember, your home isn't the only thing under threat during an ember attack. By the time you realise the danger, it might be too late as escape routes become jammed. Embers can also start fires on roads and block them completely, making late evacuation dangerous or impossible. That's why leaving early, before a fire starts, is always your safest option.
You're going to probably hear Kerry and I say that a lot during the course of this presentation, because that is our mantra for today. We want you to be out of harm's way. We want you to be away. I mean, for me, each time I watch that very graphic depiction of embers, it sends a chill up my spine to think that these embers can land on your skin and go down your airways. It's a very horrific, but very real event that could happen. Do you really want to be in that situation? I think not. Ember attack by far is the biggest cause of property loss during a fire. That's not to mean that it won't take lives as well. Yes, it will. But in terms of property loss, ember attack is the biggest agent. Ember attack, and there's a few images on your screen there, leaves the country scarred. The landscape is devoid of vegetation. And fast-moving grass fires, as depicted by the photograph on the top right there, can impact your property by what we call direct flame impact, where there is a continuity of fuel between the advancing grass fire and your property. With the CFA, we speak a lot about risk mitigation, reducing the risk to your property. One of the things that you could do in this regard is to have a break, have some sort of natural break between you and the advancing fire front. Perhaps a driveway, a non-combustible material, an area of short green grass immediately around your property. Both Kerry and I have done a lot of work with the Property Advice Visit Service, the PAVS program, PAVS. And again, the link will be available to this for that at the end of the presentation. The PAVS program is a community door knocking service that actually empowers and informs community members about the importance of property preparation. Sometimes the small things that you can do that will buy you time. It will reduce the risk of ember attack, and it will make you more comfortable knowing that you've got that element of preparation already under your belt. It may be simple things like just making sure your spouting is clear of any of that debris that could potentially harbor an ember attack. Having fuel load removed from immediately around your home, and that might be that log pile that you have stocked for your wood fire. It may mean just raking up the leaves and debris that's around the home that could be easily combustible and subject to ember attack. We also speak about gas cylinders, whose valves can be diverted away from the house. So in the event of heat explosion, they explode out as opposed to inside or towards the house. There's a variety of precautions that can be taken, simple precautions that will give you those extra few minutes, perhaps more than a few minutes, in the event of ember or fire attack. So that's ember attack. The other another important and critical factor that we have to consider during fire is radiant heat. Both ember attack and radiant heat are precursors to the arrival of the fire. Just as embers travel some 30 kilometers or so ahead of the fire front, so does radiant heat. Radiant heat is emitted from the fire front and will travel ahead of the fire. Often seen as invisible, but extremely damaging, as this next animation is going to show. Again, I'd like to warn those listeners and viewers that some of the content may well be quite disturbing. We make no apologies for that. It's designed for impact and are designed to really give you that sense of this nature of fire that is uncontrollable and very damaging. So while I locate this particular animation, I'd like to just hand over to Kerry to say a few words about radiant heat.
Right. Raj, I did mention with the ember attack that there was a place could shelter really only for a minute or two, but at least it would have given them some protection. This actually happens in the little animation coming up, and it's at the back of the house over to the right-hand side. So we'll see that in this animation about radiant heat, the character does in fact do that, and even enters the house. Again, only for a minute or so protection, but at least it forms a barrier between the little character and the radiant heat and following flames.
Wonderful. Thanks for the explanation, Kerry. So radiant heat, everybody.
Victoria is one of the most bushfire-prone parts of the world. Every summer, bushfires threaten properties and lives. But did you know it's not the flames that kill most bushfire victims? No, it's the radiant heat. Most victims die from the effects of radiant heat long before they're reached by the flames. Radiant heat is what you feel when you sit next to a campfire. If a campfire heats up to 2 kilowatts per square metre, you'll feel that it's too hot and will want to move back from the fire. If you don't, this amount of radiant heat is enough to cause burns and blisters in as little as 40 seconds. At 12 kilowatts, it can cause some materials like dry timber to ignite. A bushfire can reach 100 kilowatts, and the effects can be truly catastrophic. For humans, radiant heat can cause burns from 100 meters away and cause a dangerous increase in body temperature. Radiant heat can cause the rapid onset of heat stroke. Heat stroke damages your brain, meaning you won't be able to concentrate to make good decisions as the fire arrives. Other impacts include severe damage of internal organs and death. There are some things you can do if you're caught in a fire. Cover your skin with long-sleeved, natural fibre clothing, like wool. It's also useful to know that radiant heat only travels in straight lines and can't bend around corners. So, sheltering behind or inside solid structures may help protect you. But be aware, radiant heat will travel straight through glass. The best defence against radiant heat is a simple one. If you're not anywhere near a bushfire, its radiant heat can't hurt you. Leaving early is always your safest option.
I think in this regard, the animation speaks for itself. You know, we've got that indication that radiant heat is a killer, and by far, it's actually the biggest killer in a fire. And there's no two ways about that. That the graphic nature of that animation gave you some idea of the intensity of heat that originates from a fire. 100 kilowatts per meter squared. That in itself should be enough of a deterrent for us all to be out of harm's way. Often is the case that the CFA will conduct interviews, very, very sympathetic interviews with members of people that have been affected by fire. And as is the case, I'm going to share a slide with you next that gives you some of the testimonials that these individuals gave at that time. And I think the testimonials speak volumes. So what I'm going to do now is stop sharing my screen and share another animation, another bit of video with you. This particular video is called "I'll Never Do That Again." And what I'd like for you to understand from this is that these are not actors. These are real people who were caught in a fire situation. And again, the degree of emotional intelligence that's shared within these testimonials speak volumes. If you are sensitive to the content, please feel free to look away for the next 30 seconds or so. Thank you.
10 years ago, when all the dams were full and the tanks were full and there was plenty of water, I probably would have stayed and I would have died.
Nothing went the way we might have anticipated.
Whatever preparations you put into place, you only need something small to go wrong.
You know, in future, I don't think we'd want to put the kids through that sort of trauma, I guess. Yeah, wouldn't put the kids through that again.
If it was my choice, I wouldn't stay again. If we had another day like that, if I had the opportunity to get out, I would go before the fire even got here.
You know, it's quite amazing. Those closing few words of that statement, get out of here before the fire even got here. And that's what we want you to do. We want you to be out of harm's way before the fire even got here. The other observation that I made from that real life account was trauma and children. Do you really want trauma for your children? Trauma is one of these things that hangs around for a long, long time and can have long, far-reaching consequences on growth and development. We don't want that for our children, surely. Let's move on. Up until now, we've spoken about the many elements that make up fire behaviour. We've spoken about elements of stress, the trauma, and the need to have a plan. We need to have a fire plan that gets us out of harm's way. Having a fire plan that we practice and modify, and having a number of versions of that fire plan to cover different eventualities. We've spoken a bit about the nature of fire and how roads can be blocked. We've spoken about the indiscriminate nature of ember attack and the danger of radiant heat. They are the biggest two elements of fire that we really need to understand if we are to survive. Of course, fire has the ability to impact your decisions. How's your decision-making process is impacted by fire? Kerry, let's launch another poll at this stage. And the way we're going to do that here is what to expect from a fire. And this is, I'm going to launch the poll now. And the questions that we're asking is, well, what do you think would impact your ability to make good decisions? Again, this is a multiple choice question. So tick all those responses that you think correspond to your thoughts. What do you reckon? What is it that's going to impact your decision to make good decisions? Yeah, I'll just give you a couple more seconds there. Yep, 2 more seconds. Yep, you've all answered. So I'm going to end the polling there and share those results with you. 100% in every regard. You're spot on there. By far, one of the biggest things that will impact your decision-making process is the stress load or the stress burden, okay? As human beings, we cannot handle stress. We're not wired to handle stress. Yes, some people may be able to handle it better than others, but on the whole, the majority cannot and will not handle stress well. If you couple this with a rapidly changing situation, something that you're not in control of, that again will impact your decision to make good decisions. It'll actually compound your stress. We often feel that when we're not in control and things are not going to plan, there's a heightened level of stress. Our adrenaline starts to fire up. Our fight or flight response kicks in. Not having enough time. Time is the one thing that we all, either you like it or dislike it. The majority of us don't like running to a clock. We don't like that regimental routine style of things. Often even trying to get to the dentist for an appointment or meeting someone at a meeting place for a set time causes panic and raises our stress burden. If you then add a further layer of communication breakdown, not knowing where your loved ones are, again, your stress is going to be manifested. You are going to find it difficult to think clearly, to think rationally. This is going to impact your ability to make those good decisions, informed decisions. And at a time of fire, in an emergency management situation, you need to be able to think clearly. Have a fire plan. Have all that hard work done ahead of time so that you don't put yourself under this undue stress. I'm going to stop sharing those results now, and thank you for those that responded, and I'm going to close out of that. We've spoken now about the various elements of fire. We're going to talk to the next element, which is how do you know if there is a fire? How do you know if there's a fire in your locality? And again, I'm going to open up the chat function for you to let me know what's your go-to. What tool do you use? What app do you use, perhaps? Who do you talk to if there's a fire? How do you find out if there's a fire? Great, got a few responses coming in there. Lovely. Okay. Yeah, spot on. The Vic Emergency app. That's the 100% answer there. Thank you for those that responded in that regard. Lovely. Okay. I'm going to now introduce you to what we call the fire danger rating, or the FDR. I'm going to dispel some of the myths that we have around this. There is a bit of confusion that people have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look, before we talk to the FDR, about the FDR, I'm going to just launch a poll. And this poll is going to ask a very pertinent question at this time, which is, what do you actually understand? What does the FDR actually mean to you? I'm going to launch that poll now. Wonderful. So this particular poll has 3 questions. The first one is, how do you know, what does the fire danger rating mean to you? Part 2, does anyone know how many code red days have happened in your region in the last 5 years? And the third part of this question is, how does anyone know how many severe or extreme days have happened in your region in the last 5 years? I'll just give you a couple of seconds to answer those questions. Wonderful. I'm going to end the polling there and share those results with you. Okay. Let's go through the correct answers. I think that's probably the best way to this, because we can all learn from what the correct answers actually are. What does the fire danger rating mean? Well, it actually means the FDR is an indicator of how bad a fire would be if one were to start. Okay, that's the correct answer there. So those of you who thought otherwise, this is your learning. It's how bad a fire would be if one were to start. How hard would it be to put out? In terms of question 2, there has been nil code red days in your region in the last 5 years. And finally, there has been a total of 6 severe or extreme days in your region in the last 5 years. If you're unsure what severe and code red or extreme actually means, we're going to explore that in a bit more detail now. So I'm going to stop sharing those results and cross out of the poll. Kerry, would you like to talk to the FDR for me, please?
I'll do that, Raj.
No, thank you.
The fire danger rating system, and you've probably all seen it, has a little arrow that goes from danger rating for that day is.
Sorry, Kerry, I'm not sure whether you can hear me, but you've dropped out and you've frozen on my screen.
I'm frozen. Oh no.
Yes, you've come back now, but we lost a bit of dialogue just in the middle there.
All right. Low to moderate degree of difficulty in putting out a fire. Of course, the system shows the increase in fire danger rating. So we go to the blue area on days where there is a high degree of difficulty in containing a fire. Where the weather is more extreme, especially with the stronger winds, a very high degree of difficulty in putting out a fire. Then we get into the more dangerous zones where there is severe degree of putting out a fire. They'll be the days, hot days, dry fuel, starting to be unpleasant weather, and a summer time as we know it, which will have a handful of these sorts of days. For the fire services, extreme and code red are the same. There'll be an extreme degree of difficulty in containing a fire. Those generally hot, certainly windy, dusty days, that ugly weather that nobody looks forward to. And as you've seen from Raj's information earlier, they're quite rare, but we all know them. The reason that we have code red, and that's peculiar to Victoria at the moment, is that it is an agreement between all of the emergency services, SES, forest fire, ambulances, that all of these services would be under stress, would have massive difficulty in assisting to contain a fire. So where you hear people say, oh, I'll wait for code red, no, they don't need to. Code red already exists for fire services in the extreme category. It's the same thing for fire services. Thanks, Raj.
Wonderful, thank you. So as we move on, let's talk a bit more about the busy environment in which we live and work. Back in the day, we had traditional means of communication, which included the casual conversation. It included listening to something on the radio or the newspaper. But that platform has now been vastly bombarded with a huge amount of other information sources. I refer to this as infobesity, the fact that we have a multitude of media channels coming through to us with information. And I'm talking mainly of the digital revolution, the fact that we have digital platforms that have now become household names, that are recognized by icons, the Twitter, the Facebook, the Snapchat, the YouTube, and the list goes on. These are what we call informal means of communication. They are not necessarily credible, evidence-based, or real-time. Here at the CFA, we would strongly advocate for you to go to one of these digital platforms. These are dedicated emergency channels that offer credible, real-time, evidence-based information on fire behaviour in your locality. By far, one of the most important ones is the Vic Emergency app. For those of you listening who do not have the Vic Emergency app, if there's one thing that you can do at the end of this presentation, that is download this application to your smartphone, just like you would do with any other app. This could be your lifesaver in the event of a bad fire day. The Vic Emergency app allows you to tailor your movements on bad fire days. It allows you to navigate around fire activity and allows you to have an indication of that fire activity as it develops in and around your area. We'll be talking shortly about the Vic Emergency app and the way that it actually informs you. I'd also like to make consideration to local news and the importance of ABC local news 774. For the one reason that it could be your only lifeline out of your fire-prone area. For example, if you are caught in a fire, fire has this ability to destroy communications. Our antennas will often go down. Consequently, the traditional means of communication will be lost. Fire is a dark, noisy, smoky, disorientating, horrible place to be. In this dark space, the only connection to the outside world could be your battery-operated radio that will link you to ABC 774, that will give you intel as to developments with the emergency, and it could be your way out of this very hostile environment. We advocate for the use and presence of a battery-operated radio as part of your emergency bag, and we'll talk more about that shortly. There are a number of other platforms that are also listed there, all good in their own right, providing precise, evidence-based, formal means of communication. These are your go-to in the event of a bad fire day. The extremes, the code reds, and the severe days. Use them, use the information to get empowered to make that decision as to when are you going to leave. What's your trigger to leave your home and be out of harm's way? I'm going to hand over to Kerry now just to talk you through some of the key elements of the triage that exists on the Vic Emergency app. Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, Raj. The Vic Emergency app not only lets you know where an incident has begun, as all emergency incidents, not just fire, but for our purposes today, fire. It also provides warnings as to the progress or the changes of situation. Now, you'll notice at the bottom of the slide, it says, do not wait for a warning. So the information about the event goes on in real time. As soon as that 000 call is logged, the Vic Emergency app has it showing, but there may be a delay in posting the emergency warnings, the advice, watch and act or emergency, because the incident control centre needs to be set up and then people need to write those and have them approved. So there's a bit of a delay in that being posted. So don't wait for a warning. However, where you warnings, this is what they mean. The advice, the yellow one at the top, is an incident is occurring or has occurred in the area. Access information and other and monitor conditions, which means listen to your radio, maybe poke your nose outside and see which direction any smoke might be coming from or any peculiar noise. It can also be used as a notification that activity in the area has subsided. So it may be that the activity is winding down from a watch and act back to an advice. Of course, advice means that it's not of immediate danger to you, but certainly something is happening. The watch and act is a bit more severe. An emergency has happened nearby your area. You need to take action now to protect yourself and others. In fact, what Raj and I say is by the time the watch and act sign comes up, it could be too late. Don't wait for that warning. Have your triggers earlier than this situation. Unfortunately, we can progress to emergency warning, which has the 2 exclamation marks and is in red. Always a worry. You are in imminent danger. Need to take action immediately. You will be impacted. So definite. Really, the safest place to be is away from there, and the safest time to get away is a lot earlier than this. Thank you, Raj.
Thanks, Kerry. And 2 further additions to that warning system that you may sometimes see is the evacuation in the black background. And this is indicative that evacuation is prompted and plans are in place for you to evacuate. We also have community information, which is purely that, you know, it can be used as a notification that an incident has occurred, but there's no threat to communities. It's mainly community information. It can also take the form of a newsletter that's given to communities that have been impacted by fire or affected by fire. What we're going to do now is put all this together, because I know a lot of us may learn better visually and seeing something in action as opposed to some of the content that we're giving you at the moment. Let's put a timeline together that Kerry's going to work through, giving you an example of that messaging system and how very important it is for you to understand that you might be ahead of the warnings. So don't wait for the warning. The moment you get a sniff of something's not quite right, leave and leave early. I'm hoping that this timeline, which is stretched over 30 minutes, to give you some idea of the rapidity of fires and how rapidly fires can spread, but also perhaps the response time of our brigades linked to conditions and how this can actually mean that you may well be ahead of the warnings. So, Kerry?
Right. Well, we have on the left-hand side, Raj, where a fire starts. So at that point, a message or the little dot will appear on the Vic Emergency app. An incident has started. Fire is reported to 000 and brigades are preparing to head out and see what's happened. And if we're very fortunate, there may indeed be other machinery available, such as helicopter. Really depends on the conditions of the day. In 10 minutes, we can see that we have advice to watch, but it is already pretty close to our lovely house here. The advice message is released and already those flames are coming up to the house. At 20 minutes, when we have a watch, that things are getting way more severe, what's happened? It's already past our house. So we really ought to have left well before a fire has even started to give us a good chance to get on those roads. So the updated emergency warning, the watch and act, we should have been watching and acting way earlier. Now, no one has a crystal ball, and this is where our fire danger rating system comes in. Anyway, that fire is still travelling. Hopefully you're already out of the situation, and that fire has increased, and it's the next post is there's an emergency. Well, caramba, the emergency has already happened to our lovely house.
So
Thanks,
just to stress, thank you for that, Kerry. I mean, just to stress the importance, can you see how the advice message jumped straight to the emergency warning and there was nothing in between? This is the very nature of our triage system. You need to be ahead of the fire game. You need to be savvy of the environment around you. It could be that the gentleman or the family in the home that was impacted were oblivious until it was too late. The advice message came some 3 minutes or so before the fire actually impacted them. That's not enough time. So what's the moral of this story? Yes, stay ahead of the warnings, but also use your senses. Don't draw the blinds and put the air conditioning on and put your favorite movie on. It's about monitoring your environment. We find that a lot of folks in communities like yours are very much bound to the environment. They have an understanding, an intrinsic link with the land that they work on, the community where they live, and the work environments that they go to. They know when the sky is a slightly different color. They know if there's ash in the air or embers around. They can visualize a plume of smoke on the horizon or a glow. It's not rocket science. It's about being connected to your environment and keeping ahead of the fire game, using your senses of sight, listening out for fires. Fires make distinctive sounds, maybe the crashing down of limbs, a canopy fire at full rage, or maybe a low woodland fire and the crackle there. Also, the sense of smell, being able to smell fire, that different kind of smell in the air. These are some of the things that can be used for you to stay ahead of the fire game, understand the nature of fire. Let's summarize. What have we spoken about so far? We've spoken about the FDR, the fire danger rating, and its importance in using it as a tool to determine your behavior and the course of action for yourself and your family in the event of a bad fire day. We've spoken about using those credible, or shall we say more formal means of communication to assess fire behavior. Ideally, the Vic Emergency app. Use that in combination with the FDR. Plan your fire plan around these two tools. And finally, we've spoken about the importance of not waiting for that warning, because often you could be ahead of the warning. There's no harm in you leaving your home, leaving early. If the fire chooses to go a different direction and your home is spared, you can come back. Is it worth the risk of staying? We've spoken about the indiscriminate nature of ember attack and radiant heat. Do you really want to be in the line of fire? Let's spend a bit of time now talking about planning and decision making as it relates to fire. There's a lot of elements that we've already spoken about. But what we want to try and do is localize this to you by putting a hypothetical situation together that brings together all the elements that we've spoken about. This is as real life situation as we could make it to give you as much feeling, and we want you to be there and present in that moment as we read through a hypothetical situation and then launch a poll around some of your decision-making processes. So what I'd like to do is move on to the next slide and ask Kerry to read through this scenario that we have for hypothetical number 1. Thanks, Kerry.
Well, thanks, Raj. Let's look at the middle of the week. So it's 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. When you look outside, you can see that it's already hot and windy. We're in the middle of summer. The morning news is reporting that today is a day of extreme fire danger rating. You jump in the car to shoot off to work or to go into town, into Colac, and you can see little branches falling from the trees and feel the heat coming through the glass windows. It's about lunchtime, and you start overhearing people talking about a fire that has started over to the west. You jump on the Vic Emergency app to find out whereabouts, and you see it has started a short distance from your house in Elliminyt. You jump in the car and start heading home to make sure that everything's okay. And as you get closer to your home, you see that the road is blocked by police. You wind down the window, and they advise that it is not safe to go into the area as the fire is still burning and the trees have started to come down on the road. You will have to find somewhere else to go until the road is reopened. Now, there are a few questions on the poll.
I think the main point we want to say, well, what does this mean for our community member who's gone into town and had to rush back? And the best way to really evaluate that would be to launch that poll, Kerry. And the poll will bring together some of the thoughts around the degree of preparation that people have in such situations. So if you're able to do that, that'll be great.
Okay.
If not, I can do it from my end.
I've got it.
Oh, fantastic.
So the questions are, where would you be on your average Wednesday in summer?
Yeah.
Would you be at home? Would you be at work? Or maybe on holiday somewhere else? And thinking about last summer, would you have been prepared to spend a few nights away from home in an emergency situation like this? That means, would you have had items with you that you could take, such as medications, phone charger, those sorts of things? And again, last summer, did you have an emergency kit packed with some clothes, important documents, photos, medicine? So prepared to spend a few nights away from home, animals looked after, that sort of thing. And then did you have an emergency kit?
Wonderful. And I can see from the results here, Kerry, that the majority of people were actually at work at 8 a.m. on Wednesday morning. Okay, that's all fair enough. There were a few people at home, but the majority were at work. Interestingly, the responses to questions 2 and 3. First of all, question 2, the majority of people did not have the capacity to stay away from home at short notice like this. Interesting. And third question, the majority of people did not have an emergency bag prepped and ready to go with those important documents that you alluded to. So what does this tell us? Well, first of all, it tells us that preparation was not a key factor here. Many of our members listening today didn't have sufficient preparation for a day like this. So when we talk about the learnings of today's presentation, Fire Safety Essentials has been really to evoke that change of mindset when it comes to fire behavior and how we respond. One of the key lessons that we've learned already is the importance of preparation, having that all-important emergency bag ready, having that ready by the door, having it ready in the car already perhaps, having plan B, somewhere to stay, having an arrangement with a neighbor or a friend or someone in town, somewhere you can go as a place of shelter. So these are some of the findings from this particular poll. Thank you for all those that answered that poll. I'm going to stop sharing those results now and close the poll. And thank you. Let's move on, Kerry. Let's take it to the next scenario. What does the next scenario look like? Well,
it's the same day, except this time you jump on the Vic Emergency app and you see that fire is still a while away. The little yellow shaded area on your phone doesn't quite reach your house. So you think to yourself, oh, well, I've got enough time to nick home and grab some important stuff. So you drive home. And as you get out of the car in your driveway, you can smell smoke. And it's one of those really windy, really hot days, your element of smoke in the environment. You check the app again and you see the little yellow triangle on your screen, and it's that advice message. You should still have enough time, though, before things escalate, surely. You frantically move about the house, grabbing your important stuff, and start running them out to the car. And every now and then you check your phone to see if you're being told to evacuate. And there still isn't anything, so you know that you've got another couple of minutes, right? You're still running through a list in your head. The pets, got them. Photos, birth certificate. It's taking a bit longer than you thought it would because some of those things are in the study at the end of the house. Then you notice little patches of smoke coming up from the garden bed and that pile of leaves that you've been meaning to rake up. And embers have started falling near your home, and some of them look like they're starting to catch. You feel that surge of adrenaline pumping through your body. You're out of time. So what do you do now? Where are you going to go? And who should you be telling? Can you still drive out to the street? Is there somewhere safe that you can go to? Do you stay at the house? Do you grab the garden hose and try and put out those small fires? These are decisions that you need to make, and that's without taking into consideration other people. What if you have kids? Are they at school, nearby, or in Colac? Do you have someone who depends on you, an elderly neighbour or someone that needs assistance moving? Horses are always a question. Have they been moved out of the area? Do they have water? What if a tree comes down in the wind and is blocking the road? How on earth are you even going to know? This probably feels like a lot to take in right now, like I'm bombarding you with questions and you may not have answers for them or have considered them, okay? And that's while we're sitting here watching a webinar. We're not even actually in a fire. We don't have that situation actually here, and already we've got all of those questions happening in our minds. So, Raj, what could we have done differently?
Well, I mean, some of the responses that are coming through on the chat clearly say that we should have made plans the moment we knew that it was going to be an extreme day, and we all know what extreme means. It's hot, windy, fire's going to be more than likely uncontrollable. We should have enacted our fire plan and left. Yes, we had the appointment in Colac, but hey, appointments can be changed. Lives need to be saved. We should have made the decision not to be in that environment. Heeded the warning signs, used our knowledge bank. We know what extreme means. We know there's a potential for fire. Why be in harm's way? Why be there and subject yourself to that a tremendous amount of personal stress, agitation, not to mention the possible life-threatening situation that you're putting yourself in. Be out of the way, be gone. And yes, you're quite right. This is a hypothetical situation that we've created. It's not even a real life fire. Can you imagine how much more the pressure would be if this was a real situation, if you really were on your drive trying to find a way out of a situation where you didn't know if the road was going to be blocked, you didn't know whether to turn left or right. There's so many variables that need to be considered. Have a fire plan. Have the fire plan enacted early, when the roads are clear, when you've got assistance, when you can allow yourself time to look after loved ones, have them with you, maintain those vulnerable members in the community. That thing that I spoke about, community connection, this is when it comes into its own. When you do look out for Joan, who lives 3 doors down, and is in a wheelchair and socially isolated. It's all about understanding your community, looking out for each other, but leaving early and allowing plenty of time. That's one of the many things that you could have done differently. Having the bag ready at the door if you did have to come home as a last minute. Why run around frantically? Because that's when you lose rational thinking and therefore put your life at risk. Have the bag ready.
That's right, Raj. We already knew it was going to be an extreme day, didn't we? That's right
we
at the
did.
start of the story. So that emergency bag could have been in the car. And being in town, it's already an urban environment, safer from wildfire.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Kerry. We'll move on to the next slide, which is a summation of everything that we've spoken about so far. Plan ahead. The dreaded P word, planning, preparation, preparedness, it's all there. As an ex-Cub Scout, that was our mantra. It was all about preparation, being prepared for the worst case scenario. Stay informed, have that Vic Emergency app on your phone, and I can't stress that enough. And of course, as CFA, we are happy to provide bushfire planning workshop. And again, the information will be available to you at the end of this presentation. Let's move on to the final part of our presentation. Without going on, let me just mention something about COVID-19 before we move on. This awful pandemic is still around as we speak today. From a CFA perspective, you may leave a high-risk fire area on a day of high fire danger. If you are socially isolating at this time, please inform your next place of stay and make sure people are aware, and also enact and continue to maintain your COVID safe plan. You may travel for the purpose of preparing your property for the fire season. That's not an issue. This is very much a changing space, so always monitor the Department of Health and Human Services website for any updates regarding COVID-19. As we enter the final stage of the presentation this morning, I thank you for your ongoing presence and also for the chat and the polls that you've been answering. Thank you. Let's consider survival options. What is it that we can do if our best laid plan fails? And we've spoken about some of these elements already, but just to recap, radiant heat. Cover yourself up from head to toe. Don't leave any exposed skin. Make sure you use natural fiber clothing. In actual fact, all of these elements of clothing and wear should be an integral part of your emergency bag. They should be available for you to change into should you get caught out. We know that radiant heat is a killer. Improve your chances by wearing as much protection as possible. We've already spoken about the nature of radiant heat. It only travels laterally or in straight lines from the heat source. It cannot travel around corners, so protection can be afforded by sheltering behind or inside solid objects, such as homes, sheds, behind concrete water tanks. They will give some element of protection from the radiant heat. When we talk about survival from a fast-approaching, fast-moving grass fire and the risk of ember and radiant heat, you may choose to seek shelter or refuge in a large body of water, a river, a dam, or a swimming pool. These will afford a level of protection from the radiant heat and also from ember attack. When we talk about stationary vehicles, this is an important consideration. The CFA do not advocate for you to seek refuge in a stationary vehicle. However, we acknowledge that in the event of an emergency, this may be the only source of protection that you may have. If this is the case, make sure that the vehicle is first of all away from a main road, away from any road, access road at all, preferably on burnt or clear ground that's devoid of fuel. Make sure that the vehicle is facing the approaching fire front since the engine block will afford a level of protection from the radiant heat. Make sure that you're not on a roadway of any kind that might actually impede the passage of emergency vehicles or other cars that are on the road. Keep your lights on. Lower yourself below the level of the windows and cover yourself with a warm woolen blanket, dry. Have plenty of water in hand to maintain your hydration. Have a vantage position so you can monitor the fire as it approaches. The fire front is more than likely going to pass quite quickly, at which point remove yourself from the vehicle and find an area of safety. Cars are designed to get you from A to B. They are not designed to be places of refuge. In fact, I can't imagine anything more uncomfortable than being in a car during a fire attack. Okay, one of the considerations that I would like to make at this point is what we call the neighborhood safer place. Now, our neighborhood safer places, or should we say places of last resort, are just that. Don't expect five-star luxury at our neighborhood safer places. They are not designed to offer luxury. They are, after all, a last resort. And both Kerry and I know that this will be a very, very, very last resort for you, because you will have already implemented your fire plan. You will already have left the fire danger area. However, there may be an instance that you may get caught out. And if this is the case, a neighborhood bushfire place of last resort offers an element of protection from radiant heat. These areas are clearly defined by a green sign with the emoji of 4 persons, as you can see on the top left and bottom left of your screen. They have a clear distinction in terms of their layout. They're often an area of clearing away from fuel, with a significant formula is used to establish a particular neighborhood's place of last resort. In your particular locality, the nearest bushfire place of last resort is in Gellibrand. Gellibrand, it's the Rex Norman Park, which is approximately 16.72 kilometers away. Thereafter, you've got the Birragurra Park, 18.9 kilometers away. In Barwon Downs Parkland, you've got the old school site, again a further 19.27 k's away. And finally, again in Barwon Downs, you've got the community hub, which is again another 19.2 kilometers away. The biggest factor that we have to bear in mind here is that if you are going to seek a neighborhood place of last resort, it may be that you might have to travel some distance to get to it. The added complication here is that particular roads may be blocked, visibility may be poor, roads may be narrow to exit, you may be an impediment to emergency vehicles. Is it really worth the risk? Implementing your fire plan early will eliminate this further risk element. As we come towards the end of our presentation, I'd just like to show this slide that gives you some indication of the very nature of fire, its many faces: the plumage, the smoke, the haze, the intense radiant heat and ember attack, the scarring of the land with a fast-moving grass fire, and of course canopy fires as seen in the bottom center. This is the ugly face of fire, the very force of Mother Nature that takes many lives every year. Fire Safety Essentials is designed to give you a clear understanding of the danger that is fire and for you to take evasive action and be out of harm's way. Some of the resources that Kerry and I referred to during the presentation include your guide to survival and your guide to property preparation. And that was my reference to the PAVS, Property Advice Visit Service. Both are very succinct reads with critical information. Again, we are happy to provide you with the bushfire planning workshop, and we're happy to contact your local CFA captain to organise that should you wish. The all-important Vic Emergency app, and of course, connection and community connection to your local brigade. Ken O'Brien, who I've spoken to a couple of times, is more than happy to offer support, guidance, talk about the capacity of his local brigade in assisting yourselves in fire preparation. Before we finish this presentation, we have a final poll, Kerry. And the final poll that we're just about to launch looks at your, well, what did you really think of this presentation? Was it of value? Did you find something that will really inspire you to take more preventative or proactive action in terms of fire safety? And secondly, would you recommend this program to family, friends, neighbours, and others that live in fire-prone areas like yours? I'll just give you a couple of seconds while you complete those responses. Another 5 seconds, Kerry, and we can close. Okay, let's share those results, Kerry. Ah, wonderful. Look, it's great and very reassuring to have that feedback, and it's great for us to know that this was of value to you and that you would recommend it to other people. But ultimately, it's about taking ownership yourselves and understanding the capacity of your brigade. And the number one point is to leave and leave early. Implement your fire plan. Sit down around the table with family members, with community members, with immediate neighbours to work out what you would do in the event of a bad fire day. What's your trigger going to be? How are you going to use your fire danger rating? And of course, the Vic Emergency app to make that informed decision. I'm going to stop sharing those results there and cross out that box as I move into my final slide. The CFA acknowledge that some of the content here may have impacted some of you. And if that is the case, we apologise for that. There are a number of support services that can offer assistance in this regard, so please don't hesitate to contact them. On behalf of Kerry Deakin and myself, I would like to say thank you for your time, your patience, and your feedback this morning. Kerry, would you like to say a few words before we sign off?
No, the same as you. I do apologise for dropping out from time to time. So thanks for bearing with that. Thanks, Raj.
Thank you, Kerry. It's been great having you on board, Kerry. Thank you for your support, and stay safe during this fire period and look after each other. Thank you.